What if the class the world called trash was the only one capable of saving it? What if the weakest rank held the most ancient power, and no one knew it but the sheep? In a world where a single crystal altar decides your worth at the altar of awakening, one sentence can end a life. For a 17-year-old orphan named Dan, that sentence was short, and it was final. Shepherd. Rank F. The lowest class on the register, the village's standing joke. A death sentence dressed in 2 words. His fiancée left that same evening. The village laughed by morning, and Dan walked to an old willow tree at the edge of the pasture and put a noose around his neck. But before the rope could finish what the altar had started, something happened that had no name in any class register. A soul from another world entered that body, and it did not come empty-handed. The man who arrived in Don's place had spent 6 years running a ranch of 8,000 sheep in Montana. He knew sheep the way most people know their own heartbeat, without thinking, without stopping, without ever being wrong. His name was Daniel, and his first thought in a dying bow's body was not how to get home. It was about the flock. The smell hit him first, not blood, not rope burn. Wet grass, sweet clover, morning dew on a hillside. Daniel opened his eyes to a sky to blue and to close, and a sheep standing directly over his face. Long muzzle, silvery undercoat, horns twisted 1.5 turns, a breed that had no business existing. He blinked. The sheep nudged his cheek with a wet nose, real, warm, present. He sat up slowly and understood at once that this body was not his own. Thin arms, long fingers, a fresh red mark from a rope burned into the wrist. Above him, a severed noose of coarse twine dangled from the willow branch, slashed by someone's knife, not by chance. Daniel did not panic. He counted. 16 head, 1 old ram, clear eye, gray-muzzled, for ewes with swollen flanks, 3 weeks from lambing. 1 lamb by the water, favoring her left front leg. He stood up, his legs buckled. This body weighed barely 50 kilograms. Barefoot, a shirt of rough cloth, pants held up by a knotted string. Daniel walked toward the limping lamb. Not straight, in an arc, slow and wide, so she wouldn't spook and run. He crouched 3 steps away and held out an open palm. The lamb glanced at him with an amber eye and came. He lifted her, light as a bundle of wool, and examined the hoof, a sharp pebble, lodged deep between the toes, infected for at least a week. No one had noticed, or no one had bothered. Daniel snapped a twig from the willow and whittled it into a makeshift hoof pick. He worked millimeter by millimeter, murmuring in a language Dawn's body somehow knew. Hush, little one. The pebble came out black and sharp. He carried her to the stream and washed the wound. No pus. Lucky. He set her down. 1 step, then another. She walked on the injured leg, and that was the beginning. Daniel circled a flock and read it like a book he had memorized in another life. For ewes were thinner than they should be in their 3rd trimester. Protein deficiency. They needed salt. They needed minerals. 3 sheep had loose stools and dirty hind legs, parasites, or bad water. He followed the path to the puddle where half the flock drank and found a bloated dead rat rotting by the bank. He clenched his jaw and looked uphill where a spring gushed cold and clean from under a rock. He drove the flock uphill. They resisted. Creatures of habit. Creatures of the lower pasture. Daniel didn't rush them. He walked behind. 1 by 1, they climbed and drank the clean water. The small one named Kopka went first. Small things first, that was always how it worked. When the sun reached its zenith, Daniel sat on a rock and sorted through the fragments of someone else's memory. 10, 17, orphan, a hollow between 3 hills, a village of 30 households. 16 communal sheep dumped on the boy no one wanted because no one else would tend that pitiful patch of land. 2 months ago, the rite of awakening, the altar spoke. Shepherd, rank F, the lowest class on record. The crystal had decided, and the village had agreed, and his fiancée had agreed, and Dan had agreed. Daniel did not agree. He had never agreed with that kind of arithmetic. 2 people were climbing the path from below, an old man with a cane, a woman in an apron, carrying bread. They looked at him the way people look at a sick dog, pity and a careful distance. The old man said the priest had ordered Dan to the temple to thank the altar gods for showing mercy. Daniel thanked them for the bread. He counted the flock, 16 heads, lambing in 3 weeks. He needed salt, a knife, and a rope, not for a noose, for a pen. The old man left. Daniel ate half the bread. He crumbled the other half for the emaciated Kopka. Evening crept over the hills. Chimneys smoked in the village below. Daniel almost laughed. Trash class, on his ranch in Montana. 8,000 head had brought in for $100,000 a year. He knew exactly how to grow a herd from 16 to 600 in 3 years. How to bring lamb mortality down to 2%. How to build something from nothing on a hill no one wanted. And this world called that trash. Fine. He lay down on the grass. Kopka pressed herself against his side. Her wool was warm. Her undercoat was fine and dense. Daniel ran his fingers through it and felt the quality, the way a jeweler feels a stone. Less than 20 microns, that was cashmere quality. That was something the village had no idea was sitting on. His last thought before sleep wasn't about home. It was about mineral supplements for the pregnant use and where to find them. Morning came cold. He was up before dawn. 6 years on a ranch had made 5 o'clock automatic. He made his rounds. 16, 16. Everyone in place. Kopka stepped on her sore leg and held her weight. Then the sun touched the eastern hill, and the first ray fell across the flock. And something changed. A thin thread stretched from each sheep to the center of Daniel's chest, and warmth flowed through every one. He froze. His hands grew heavy, not from pain, from strength. He bent to a flat stone near the pen, 40 kilograms of rock, and lifted it with one hand like an empty bucket. He set it down slowly. He understood what was happening, or he was beginning to. Everyone knew that a shepherd gained endurance for each head in the flock, but that was the part everyone thought they knew. That wasn't the whole truth. The threads were not equal. The old ram sent a dense surge of strength. The pregnant Awe sent plenty as well. But the sick ewe on the edge, dull coat, hollow eyes, gave almost nothing. A sick animal gave almost nothing. It all depended on health, on calm, on trust. And Daniel smiled for the first time in 2 days. Because this world believed that 16 sheep were 16 units, a fixed number, a ceiling. It didn't know about rotational grazing, micronutrient balance, quarantine, herd stress, or selective breeding. It didn't know that a happy, healthy sheep was not at all the same as just a sheep. Daniel dusted off his knees and looked east where the sun was rising over 3 hills. Somewhere in this world there were high-ranking heroes and legendary warriors and dungeon conquerors. Here stood a skinny woe with a trash deer class and a flock of 16 who had been rescued from a rotting puddle. And he knew exactly what to do next. Find salt, build a pen, heal the sick ewe. He headed downhill. Kopka limped along behind him, and she was barely limping anymore. The village of Lokino woke with the roosters, mud brick houses, thatched roofs, a muddy path, chickens, the smell of manure. Eyes watched him from windows, from behind fences. Someone whispered. The body's memory reminded him, 2 days ago, that Bo had put a noose around his neck. The whole village knew. They pitied him. They feared him. They kept their distance as if a failed suicide attempt were something contagious. Daniel found the blacksmith shop by sound, a heavy, rhythmic thud of hammer on iron. The blacksmith had red hair and black hands. Beside him stood a broad-shouldered young man his own age, strong, smug. The blacksmith's son, the new fiancé of Dawn's former fiancée, as it happened. Daniel asked for a small knife for who fork and any available salt. The son snorted. He said a fool would be better off going to the temple than begging for knives. Daniel looked at him calmly, without anger, without anything. The blacksmith's son looked away first. The blacksmith pulled an old knife with a broken handle from a box and named his price. 3 copper coins. Daniel had 4 in his pocket. He ended over 3. The knife was dull and crooked. It would do. He found salt at the miller's shed on the village edge, a whole copper coin for a handful. He gave away his last one. Now he was penniless. But he had a knife and a handful of salt. He walked back to the hill. The flock was grazing by the spring. Kopka ran toward him. He crouched down and let her sniff the salt. He found a flat stone, poured half the salt onto it, and smeared it into a rough lick. The sheep came within a minute. They licked greedily. They hadn't tasted salt in a long time, perhaps ever. The sick ewe came last, but she came. She licked longer than the rest. A severe deficiency, visible in every hollow of her coat. Daniel watched and began to map the pasture with his hands and tongue the old-fashioned way. He pulled stems, sniffed them, rubbed them between his fingers, tasted the bitterness or sweetness of each one. An hour later he had the whole hill catalogued in his mind. Upper slope, good grass, heavy with clover. Lower slope, poor soil, less protein, a mismatch for pregnant ewes. And a ravine to the west, damp, rich. Something resembling alfalfa grew there. thick and green. If it was anything close to the real thing, it was gold. He drove the herd toward the ravine. The ewes hit the greenery and ate like they hadn't eaten in weeks. Maybe they hadn't. Daniel nodded. Alfalfa, or something close enough to count. A plan formed with the simplicity of something that had always been true. Morning on the upper slope by the spring. Afternoon, 2 hours in the ravine. Evening, back to the high ground. Rotation. Simple, basic. No one had done it here. Here, they left the flock in one spot until the grass ran out and then moved on. For the next 3 days, Daniel worked from before dawn to after dark. Every morning he felt the surge from the flock, stronger with each passing day, not because the numbers had grown, because the animals had grown healthier. Salt, clean water, rotational grazing. The sick with the dull coat began to lift her head. Her coat wasn't glossy yet, but her eyes had cleared. Her thread in the morning flow had strengthened from a drop to a trickle. On the 4th day, Daniel built a new pen, or rather, rebuilt the rotten one at the foot of the hill. He went to the grove at the pasture's edge and looked at 3 suitable trees, thin and straight. Then he remembered the rock he had lifted with one hand. 40 kilograms, like an empty bucket. He gripped the nearest trunk with both hands and pulled. The tree came out of the ground, roots and all, like a carrot from a garden bed. He stood there and stared at it. The roots still had dirt falling off them. He looked around. No one was watching. He pulled 2 more, chopped the branches, trimmed them with his crook knife, drove the posts into the new ground, tied the rails with twine. By evening, the pen was ready, not beautiful, but solid. Kopka went inside first. She sniffed the nearest post, rubbed her cheek against it, approved. Daniel crouched by the pen and thought carefully. His strength had been growing every morning since day 1. Today he had uprooted 3 trees with his bare hands. That was not normal for any class, not even close to F. He wanted it to stay that way for now. No one had seen it. No one needed to. On the 5th day, an old neighbor named Horlick came up the hill with a cane and a frown to ask why. The sheep had been moved. Daniel explained about the dead rat in the puddle, about invisible dirt in stagnant water. Horlick looked at him like he'd suggested the sky was green. He said his father had grazed sheep by that puddle for 40 years. Daniel didn't argue. He nodded and said Horlick might be right. A week later, Horlick's flock started dying. An old ewe first, then a lamb, then 2 more. For animals in 10 days, the priest came, man prayed. Nothing. A healer came, man gave a decoction. Nothing. The sheep kept dying. Daniel knew the cause. Leptospirosis, or the local version of it. Bacteria from a dead rat carried downstream. Incubation, 7 to 10 days, then kidney failure, then death. His flock had been moved to clean water on day 2, just in time. He went to Horlick anyway. He found the old man sitting on the ground beside a dead lamb, staring at nothing. Daniel sat beside him and told him plainly, move the remaining sheep to clean water right now, and fill in that puddle. Horlick turned to him with anger in his eyes, said a boy from the trash class wasn't going to teach him how to herd sheep. Daniel stood up. He nodded. He went back to his pen. 3 days later, 2 more of Horlick's sheep died. And then Horlick came himself. He stood silently by the fence and looked at Daniel's healthy, glossy-coated flock for a long time. Daniel didn't say a word about the warning. He simply asked how many were left. 12. There had been 18. 6 were dead. He said, drive them up here. There's clean water and enough room. Horlick looked at him a long time. Then he nodded. The merged flock was kept separate. 2 weeks of quarantine. No mixing until he was certain they were clean. Horlick listened without arguing. He had lost that argument already, 6 times over. That week, the village began looking at Daniel differently for the first time. Not pity, not contempt, something newer and harder to name. A bewildered kind of attention. A shepherd with a trash glass rank whose flock hadn't lost a single head, whose limping lamb now ran up slopes, whose sheep's wool was glossy and thick, while Horlick had 6 fresh graves. The village whispered. Daniel didn't listen. He was counting 23 heads for pregnant ewes, lambing in 10 days. He needed warm bedding, a clean rag, and light. He gathered dry grass, spread it in the corner of the pen, and found an old clay lantern in an abandoned shed. No oil. He rendered fat from the wool. Lanolin. It smoked, but it burned. On the 13th day after waking up in this world, Daniel sat in the pen in the dark and waited. The first ewe lay on her side. It had begun. He knelt beside her. His hands were washed. The knife was clean, The rag was ready. His voice was low and steady. "Quiet. Good girl. Come on." He had attended hundreds of births, thousands, over 6 seasons in Montana, sleeping 3 hours a night, moving pen to pen, pulling lambs out, wiping them down, setting them on their feet, placing them with their mothers. Now his hands worked without his having to tell them what to do. The lamb came out head first, the right position. He caught it, wiped it clean, cleared its nose. Tiny, wet, warm, alive, the lamb sneezed and bleated in a high thin voice. The ewe turned her head and began to lick. Daniel sat back on the straw and exhaled. 1 down, 3 to go. By morning, all 4 ewes had given birth, 7 lambs. 3 sets of twins and a single, all alive, all healthy. Daniel hadn't slept. He delivered them one by one in the smoky lantern light, hands covered in blood and mucus, back refusing to straighten. But all 7 got to their feet. All 7 found udder. All 7 began to suckle. 23 heads. There had been 16. Daniel sat in the pen on wet straw as dawn came, surrounded by ewes and their newborns. Aunt Hopka settled against his knee. With the sunrise came the flow. 23 threads now, 7 of them thin as spiderweb, new legs barely there. But they were there, and the 4 ewes that had just given birth sent more than yesterday. Much more. Daniel raised his fist. Muscles that hadn't existed yesterday pressed against the skin of his forearm, firm as cables. He walked to the old millstone by the barn, wide and heavy, more than he could have moved a week ago. He lifted it with one hand. He set it down. He walked back to the pen. The news spread through the village in half a day. 7 lambs, all alive. Dan, the one who had been in a noose 2 weeks ago. The old women shook their heads. The men frowned, and the priest came in person. A fat man with an oily voice and soft hands. He stood by the fence and looked at the lambs and at Daniel. He said the altar gods were merciful and Dan must come to the temple with a thank offering. 1 lamb. Daniel looked at him. His face was calm. His eyes were not. He said he wouldn't give up a single lamb, not one. The priest flushed red. He said refusing the sacrifice was an insult to the altar, that the gods could take what they had given. Daniel nodded and said that if the gods wanted it back, it could come themselves. He wouldn't give the priest a lamb. The priest left with a straight back and a heavy step, and Daniel had made his first enemy in this world. A petty one, but petty men with power over frightened people are their own kind of dangerous. Daniel went back to work. He had no time for priests. 23 heads, 7 newborns. The first 2 weeks decide everything. Hypothermia, infection, malnutrition, injury. He slept in the pen every night, woke every 2 hours. Checked, counted, touched noses. Wet nose, healthy. Dry and hot, a problem. All 7 were growing fast. All 7 were safe. On the 4th day after lambing, a girl appeared at the fence. Daniel didn't notice her right away. She was standing very still behind the rails. Skinny, gray eye, tangled hair, a baggy dress, hands tucked into her sleeves. She was watching the lambs the way people watch things they want but have stopped allowing themselves to want. Daniel was milking a ewe. He turned his head once. The girl froze like a rabbit. He looked away and kept milking. A minute passed. The girl relaxed. Another minute. She took a step closer, then another. Then she was at the fence. Daniel finished. He poured a mug of milk, set it on the fence post, and went to the next pen without looking back. When he returned, the mug was empty. The girl stood in the same place, milk on her upper lip, eyes enormous and afraid and grateful all at once. He poured another. This time he looked at her. He asked her name. A long silence, then, quietly, Hannah. He asked if she was hungry. She didn't answer. He could see her collarbones, her wrists, the dark circles under her eyes. She hadn't eaten properly in a long time. He handed her bread and a full jug of milk. Her hands shook when she took them. She ate standing up, quickly, like an animal afraid it would be taken away. When she finished, Daniel asked if she knew how to milk. Hannah nodded. He opened the gate and pointed to a ewe that hadn't been milked yet. Hannah went in, sat down, placed her hands on the udder. Her hands were small but steady. She knew exactly what she was doing. The milk fell in thin, even streams. The ewe stood perfectly still. Didn't flinch, didn't step out of place. Animals sense people. It isn't magic, it's a fact. A sheep won't let a nervous person near her. An angry one even less. Hannah was as quiet as water in a still pond, and the ewe could feel it. Hannah milked, Her face held an expression Daniel had seen hundreds of times on people who do something for the first time and discover they're good at it. A small, quiet Joe, she finished. She looked up at him. He told her to come back tomorrow morning. Hannah came back the next day and the day after that. On the fourth day, Daniel learned her story, not from her, but from a neighbor. Hannah Lee, 16 years old, 3 months ago. The rite of awakening. The altar had shown nothing. Emptiness, no class, no rank, not even an error, just silence. The priest had declared her cursed, classless. It had never happened in the village before. And classless was worse than F. Classless was not even on the register. Classless was nothing at all. Her parents were alive. They had not kicked her out. They had simply stopped seeing her. Father, mother, younger brother, all of them looked through her as if she had already left. She slept in the barn. She ate what was left. She came to the well only at night so no one would see. 3 months of that. 3 months of being erased while still breathing. Daniel listened to all of it without speaking. He clenched his teeth. His hands lay flat on his knees, fingers white. When the neighbor left, he sat for a long time watching Hannah comb the wool on the old ram's flank. The ram stood with his eyes closed. He liked it. Hannah liked it. 2 creatures the world had written off, happy together in the morning light. Daniel stood up and walked over. She looked up with the usual flash in her eyes, the fear he would tell her to leave. He said they had to start shearing tomorrow. The undercoat was ready. If they didn't shear now, the heat would make the sheep miserable. There was a lot of work. He couldn't handle it alone. He asked if she would stay for good. Hannah looked at him for a long time. Her lips trembled. She turned away and nodded. That night, she slept in the pen on clean straw. Kopka lay beside her. In the morning, when Daniel woke, Hannah was already milking. Quiet, intent. The bucket already half full. She had gotten up before him. He didn't say anything. He just started his rounds. They sheared wool for 3 days. Daniel with a crook knife because there were no shears. Because this world hadn't thought to provide any. 1 sheep took an hour. Hannah held them, pressing their heads gently but firmly to the ground. Not roughly. Just enough. She learned fast. Daniel sheared. He talked to each sheep by name. Hannah listened, then began to repeat in a near whisper, "Good girl, stay calm." Her voice was barely audible. The sheep accepted it the way they accepted his. When the first fleece fell onto the spread-out rag, Daniel crouched and touched it. Silvery undercoat. Fine, soft, long. He pinched a strand between thumb and forefinger and pulled slowly. It didn't snap. He held it to the light. The fiber glistened, not like ordinary wool, brighter, with a faint pearlescent sheen. Less than 18 microns, he was certain, staple length over 10 centimeters, resilience like nothing he'd held in either of his lives. This wasn't good wool. This was the best wool he had ever seen. He carefully folded the fleece and looked at Hannah. He said this wool was worth money. Big money. Hannah didn't understand. She had never seen big money. A week after lambing, with the flock settled into a rhythm, came the county magistrate, a heavy-set man on horseback with 2 soldiers, arriving to collect taxes and update the class register. Daniel was summoned along with 2 other young men who had undergone the rite of awakening that quarter. Low ceiling, smell of onions and smoke. The magistrate opened his thick register and read without looking up. Dan, class shepherd, rank F. How many head? Daniel said 23. The magistrate raised an eyebrow and wrote it down. Then came the second thing. The community owed the miller for gold coins, a debt outstanding for 3 years. The community could pay it off with labor, 1 laborer for a full year. The magistrate looked at Daniel. The priest, standing nearby with folded hands and a smooth smile, nodded encouragingly. There it was. The priest had found a legal path to what Daniel had denied him. The lamb, the obedience, the gone. A debt paid in labor. An F-rank shepherd was the community's most disposable resource. On paper it made perfect sense. Daniel stood in silence and thought. He could lift the table and the man sitting at it with 1 hand. That wasn't a solution. He asked if the debt could be settled in goods instead. The magistrate hesitated. Yes, if the goods were worth for gold pieces. Daniel said that in 1 month he would bring wool unlike anything seen in this county, worth more than for gold pieces. The magistrate snorted. The priest grimaced, but the law allowed it, and formally they could not refuse. Daniel was given a month. He left the house and walked back up the hill. 1 month. He needed to shear the entire flock, wash the fleece, and get to the city. The shearing took 12 days with a crook knife. 23 sheep, 1 hour each. Every fleece inspected and sorted. The finest came from the ewes that had just land, spiderweb thin fiber, long, springy, glowing. Then came the washing, 3 rinses, warm water to strip the grease, cool water to compact the fibers, cold water to set them. Daniel spread the fleeces on rocks and grass and turned them every 2 hours. Hannah helped. She handled each one like a jewel. Maybe she could sense it. After 5 days, the wool was ready. After washing, it had become even better, silvery, soft, with a sheen that had deepened rather than faded. He packed the finest wool into 3 sacks and the standard quality into 5, 8 sacks total. Hannah asked where he was going. Daniel said to the city, the county seat, where there was a market and merchants. She pressed her lips together. She was afraid to be left with the herd alone. He could see it in every line of her. He crouched down and looked her in the eye. He said he believed in her. The herd knew her. Kopko wouldn't leave her side. He'd be back by evening tomorrow. Hannah nodded. Her eyes were bright. She didn't cry. Daniel left at dawn with 3 sacks of the finest wool on his back, moving easily under a weight that should have bent a grown man double. As he walked the road, he could still feel his flock, every thread stretched thin with distance but intact. The count stood on the hill. Kopko was beside Hannah. The threads weakened but did not break. Interesting, he thought. He covered the 4-hour journey in 2.5. The county seat turned out to be a large village with stone houses and a market square. He went looking for wool merchants. He found 3. The first looked at his bare feet and dirty pants and turned away without listening. The second opened a sack, crumpled the wool in his hands with a neutral expression, and offered 5 silver coins for everything. Daniel knew what 5 silver coins meant. He knew what this wool was worth. He politely took the sack and walked out. The third merchant sat in a dim corner shop that smelled of dyes and dried herbs. An old man, thin, with long yellow fingers. He looked at Daniel without expression. Daniel silently opened the sack and placed the best fleece on the counter. The old man reached for it. He took it. He held it to the light, fingers moving quickly, professionally. Then he stopped moving. He brought the fleece closer. He sniffed it. He stretched a strand between his fingers and let it spring back. He set it down and looked at Daniel with entirely different eyes. Not indifferent, sharp. He said he had traded wool for 40 years. He had seen wool from all 6 provinces, including the royal flocks of the Duke of Valmore. He said he had never seen anything like this. Daniel waited in silence. The old man named his price, 2 gold pieces per pound. 3 sacks, roughly 20 pounds of the finest grade. 40 gold pieces. The community debt was 4. 40 gold pieces was 10 times that. Daniel didn't show the math crossing his face. He nodded. He agreed, but he had a condition. He needed tools, real shearing shears, steel ones. Salt, a sackful, rope, clean bandaging cloth, and information. Who in town dealt in livestock? What breeds were available? What were the prices? The old man listened to all of it, then he nodded. An hour later, Daniel walked out of the shop with 35 gold pieces in his belt, shears on his back, and a sack of salt over his shoulder. The old man's name was Master Alden. He had sold wool to capital tailors for 30 years and would take every ounce Daniel brought at the same price. All of it, any amount, indefinitely. Daniel walked home and thought about what 35 gold pieces meant to a country beau with an F rank. It meant he wouldn't spend it on houses. He would spend it on sheep, good ones, young ones, for breeding. A breeding ram with clean genes to introduce into the line. Selection records, which ram, which hay, what lambs, what wool weight, what disease resistance. 6 years in Montana had taught him that breeding takes generations, and generations take time. And time takes patience. He had all 3. He returned to the hollow at sunset. Hannah saw him from a distance and ran to meet him, then stopped 3 steps away. Daniel set down his bag, untied it, and held out the shears. Steel, sharp, gleaming. Hannah turned them over in her hands, ran her thumb along the blade, and looked up. He took out something else, wrapped in a small cloth, a wooden comb with fine teeth, bought at a trinket stall for a copper penny, for her hair. Hannah looked at the comb, then at his hand, then at his face. She pressed it to her chest and turned away. He pretended not to see her, wipe her eyes with her sleeve. He went to count the herd. 23, all accounted for, all healthy. Kopka ran to him, at a full sprint, not limping at all. He lifted her and held her to his chest, worn and alive, for kilograms of trust. The next morning, He went to the village elder and placed 4 gold coins on the fence post. The community debt, paid in full. The elder picked up 1 coin, turned it over, looked at Daniel, opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. He asked where they came from. Daniel said he had sold wool. The village elder sat for a long time staring at the coins. 3 years of outstanding debt settled by a trash-rank shepherd. When he finally looked up, his eyes held something that had never been there before. Not pity, not contempt, confusion, the honest kind. The priest found out that same day. Daniel saw him at the village head's house with his arms waving and his face red. The plan had failed. The debt was gone. There was no legal hook left. Daniel returned to the hill. He had work to do. 3 days after the city trip, he began expanding the pen. The old fence was already too small for 23. He went to the grove for timber. This time, someone might be watching. He used his knife instead of his hands, slower, less obvious. He needed an axe. He'd buy one next time. The new pen was 3 times the size of the old one, with a separate section for the lambs, a canopy of poles and straw for rain, a salt lick, and a water trough carved from a hollowed log. Daniel had channeled water from the spring through a clay gutter by slow and gravity. Hannah helped without being asked and without words. She hauled straw. She pressed clay into cracks. She handed him poles. Daniel looked at her and thought that a girl the world had written off as nothing worked harder and better than half the village. On the 25th day, one of Horlick's remaining ewes couldn't deliver. The lamb was coming out backward. Horlick ran to Daniel's pen, face pale, hands shaking. He said the sheep was dying. Daniel went with him. The away was on her side, cloudy eye, breathing in shallow waves. Classic backward presentation. No gloves, no gel, just his hands and a rag and the knowledge of how many times he had done this in another life. He washed his hands, inserted carefully, found the lamb inside, small, alive, still moving, and turned it slowly, millimeter by millimeter. 10 minutes later, the lamb came out wet and weak and alive. He wiped it clean, cleared its nose, placed it with its mother. The ewe raised her head and began to lick. Horlick stood behind him. Tears were running down the old man's face. 60 years old and weeping over a lamb, because 6 animals had died in the past month and every new life was a kind of miracle. Daniel stood, wiped his hands, and said the lamb would need watching, warmth, extra milk if the mother couldn't manage. Horlick nodded. Then he said something Daniel hadn't expected. He said that when the boy was assigned the shepherd's class, he had laughed along with everyone else, and he was ashamed. Daniel put a hand on his shoulder. He said it didn't matter. What mattered was that the lamb was alive. That evening, Horlick came to the pen with his best young ewe, strong, solid bone structure, dense stick wool, a gift for saving the lamb. Daniel almost refused. Then he looked at the ewe. Fresh blood, a new gene pool. He accepted her. He thanked him. The ewe went into the pen and the others sniffed her and the count watched with interest. 24 heads. Daniel stood by the pen in the cooling evening and counted. A month ago, there had been 16. The morning flow from 24 animals was strong enough to lift boulders he couldn't have touched on his first day. But the strength faded. He had tested it on purpose, walked away from the herd, farther and farther. 3 miles out, the first dip. 5 miles. His body grew heavy. 10 miles, barely walking. He ran back and the threads filled him again instantly, like water rushing into an empty vessel. The tether, that was the shape of his class. Without the flock, he was ordinary. With them, he could move mountains. He didn't need mountains. He needed 24 healthy sheep to be healthy and calm and safe. On the 32nd day, a stranger appeared on the village road, a merchant in a fur-lined cloak on a well-groomed horse. He rode to Daniel's pen, jumped down, smiled a wide white smile. His name was Torgen. He dealt in cattle, from Walheim. He'd heard about the flock in the hollow that never got sick, about the wool Master Alden was buying, about the shepherd who did things others couldn't. He looked at the flock over the fence with a professional's quick eyes, and whistled. Then he turned to Daniel and named his price. 20 gold pieces per head, the whole flock, 480 gold coins. Daniel said nothing. Torgen, reading the silence as negotiation, raised the price. 25 per head, 600. Daniel said no, not for sale. Torgen blinked, his smile shifted. Thinner, harder. He said this was the kind of money man with an F rank never saw twice in a lifetime. Daniel repeated, not for sale, not a single one. Torgen mounted his horse and rode away without a farewell. Daniel watched him go. He placed his hand on the Count's forehead. The old ram stood beside him, watching the horse disappear down the path. "Hush," Daniel said. "You're not going anywhere." 3 days after Torgen's visit, something arrived in the evening that wasn't a merchant and wasn't a priest. 5 men from the grove at the edge of the pasture, dressed in dark clothes, knives on their belts, faces covered with rags. One carried a short sword. They were moving toward the pen with the certainty of people who had been told exactly where to go. Not random bandits. Bandits don't know where the pen is. These were sent by Torgen or someone Torgen had told. He bought the refusal and decided to take the answer for free. Daniel looked at Hannah. He said quietly, "Behind the pen, lie down. Don't move until he calls." Hannah went pale, but didn't argue. She darted into the grass and disappeared. Daniel stepped outside the pen and pulled the gate shut behind him. He stood in front of it. The 5 stopped 5 paces away. The largest one in front looked at Daniel, a skinny, barefoot, unarmed boy in a dirty shirt. He smirked under his bandana. Daniel could see the smirk in his eyes. The leader said they wanted the sheep. Simple. Step aside. No one gets hurt. Daniel didn't move. The leader sighed and nodded at 2 men on the left. They moved to go around the pen. Daniel moved faster. Much faster. He was at the side wall before they were, and all 5 of them went still in a way they hadn't planned to go still. One pulled out a knife. Daniel looked at the knife. Cheap. Dull metal. He could snap it with 2 fingers. He could throw that man across the pen. He could do what heroes did in stories. But he wasn't a hero. He was a shepherd. And shepherds don't fight predators. They make attacking too costly to bother. He bent down and picked up a flat stone by the fence. 30 kilograms. The one he used as a salt block. He lifted it with one hand. Easily. Like a mug. And he hurled it, not at the men, into the ground in front of them. The stone hit and sank a hand's depth into the trampled earth with a sound like something final. 5 men froze. The one with the knife took a step back. All of them looked at the stone, then at the dent, then at the skinny barefoot boy who had just tossed it one-handed. The leader raised his hand slowly, took 1 step back, said they'd made a mistake. Wrong yard. He turned. All 5 walked quickly back into the grove without looking behind them. Daniel stood there until the footsteps faded. Then he exhaled. His hands were shaking. Not from effort, from adrenaline. The predators on the ranch in Montana had been coyotes, not men with knives. He called out. Hannah rose from the grass, pale and unsteady, and came to him and gripped his shirt and pressed her face against his chest. She wasn't crying. She just stood there, holding on, shaking. Daniel put his hand on her head and stood still until she stopped. Then he gently pushed her back and said, "They needed to check the flock." The flock had huddled together. The Count stood between the herd and the spot where the strangers had been, horns forward, head low, ready. Daniel stroked his muzzle. "Good bow, thank you," the Count snorted. Kopka wriggled out from the pile of lambs and ran to Daniel. He picked her up and held her to his chest, worn and alive and his. He didn't sleep that night. He sat by the pen, watching, listening. They didn't come back, but they would, or others would. The flock had become visible. The wool had become visible. The money had become visible. The world was looking at the hollow and seeing a skinny boy with a trash glass rank and wealth he appeared unable to protect. The world was wrong, but he couldn't throw a stone at every threat that came. 1 stone is a demonstration. 2 stones are rumors. 3 stones are order recruiters at the door. He needed a different kind of protection, the kind that comes from people who have something to lose. He sat on the hilltop the next morning and looked at the valley below, a hollow surrounded by 3 hills like walls, 1 entrance from the south, a spring inside, a grove, pastures on the slopes. Through a shepherd's eyes, it was a perfect 10, natural walls, a single gate, water and food inside. All he needed to do was close the entrance, not with a fence, with people. He went to Horlick first, explained about the men in the night, said they needed to merge and guard together. Horlick paled when he heard about the threat to his sheep. He thought for a while, then he nodded. By evening, Daniel had visited 3 more households, old Martha with her 4 goats, the widower Bryn with 5 sheep and a lame donkey, a young family on the outskirts, Neil, his wife, 3 goats and chickens. He told each of them the same thing. They came at night. We can't hold them alone. Together we can. Not because of Daniel, because of fear. Small people band together when the world presses in. That's how herd works. That's how people work. Over the next week, Daniel built a communal pen on the upper slope. Posts driven deep, 3 rails, a gate with a bolt, almost 50 animals total, his 24 sheep, Horlick's 12, Martha's 4 goats, Bryn's 5 sheep and donkey, Neil's 3 goats and chickens. Hannah assigned duties without being asked. She simply started, and everyone followed. Milking in the mornings, watching the lambs in the afternoon, counting heads at evening. Old Martha watched her work for a day and said the girl was born for the barnyard, not as an insult. As a compliment, Hannah looked at her and gave the smallest smile Daniel had ever seen from her, the first one he'd witnessed. On the 40th day, the morning flow changed. Daniel stood at dawn in the familiar web of threads and felt something new, thin, faint, from a different source. He looked around, Martha's old white goat with a broken horn. A thread was coming from her. Daniel sat down on the ground and thought. He hadn't raised that goat, or sheared it, or treated it. He'd fed it and watered it. But she had been living in his pen for weeks. She drank his water, she grazed beside his flock. She had decided, on her own terms, that she belonged here. The system counted it that way too. Not presence, care, not nearness, trust. He checked the other 3 of Martha's goats, nothing. Only the oldest, the calmest one, the one that always stood closest to the count, the one that came first to the spring. She trusted, through the herd, through him. Connection by proximity and peace. It worked with more than sheep. The system window appeared at the edge of his vision, semi-transparent, as if written in the air. Class: shepherd, rank F, charges, 24 sheep, 1 goat. Path of development: next step, cattle herder. Condition: 30 animals of 3 species. He had 25. He needed 5 more animals and a 3rd species. He looked at Bryn's lame donkey, standing dejected in the corner, ribs visible, hooves grown out into curling, uncut curves, mane matted and forgotten. Bryn didn't beat him, he simply ignored him. The donkey was old, he was useless, he was waiting for a reason to stop standing. Daniel walked over and held out his hand. The donkey lifted his head, ears forward, eyes clouded. He sniffed the palm. Warm breath. Daniel said quietly, "It's been a while since your hooves were trimmed, hasn't it?" The donkey nudged his paw, and Daniel crouched down, took the front leg, and began to work with his knife. The hoof was cracked, overgrown, painful. The kind of pain that makes every step a cost. But the donkey stood still and didn't flinch. Daniel worked and thought. 30 animals, 3 types, sheep, goats, donkeys. He finished trimming, combed the mane, gave the donkey a piece of bread. The clouded eyes looked at him, and something behind them shifted slightly. The next morning, when the dawn flow spread outward, a new thread appeared, heavier, steadier. The thread of a donkey. 26 strands, 3 kinds. But the window hadn't moved. The path of development still said, 30 animals of 3 species. He was counting wrong. He needed 30 animals that trusted him, not 30 animals in the pen. He went to Neil's yard, 3 goats and a dozen chickens. Neil met him at the fence, wary. A month ago he had laughed at Dan. Now he hadn't laughed in a long time. He hadn't known what else to do instead. Daniel said he wanted to help with the goats, for free. Neil asked why. Daniel said healthy goats give more milk. Neil's wife was 3 months pregnant, she needed milk. Neil looked at his wife standing in the doorway. She nodded. Neil stepped back from the fence. Daniel entered and saw what he needed to see. A dusty dark bar, old straw on the floor unchanged for months, ammonia thick enough to taste. 1 goat was coughing, dry, persistent, no infection, just dust. Just bad air and no one's attention. He told Neil they needed to clean the barn completely, remove all the old bedding, scrub the floor, add ventilation. Neil said that was a lot of work. Daniel rolled up his sleeves and said he'd help. Half a day. Neil hauled straw. Daniel scraped the floor. Hannah arrived uninvited and swept silently. Neil's wife brought water. By evening the barn was clean. Fresh straw, a ventilation hole covered with burlap, light, air. The goats walked in and lay down immediately. The coughing goats stopped coughing by the 2nd day. Daniel trimmed their hooves, brushed their coats, changed the trough water daily. Neil watched with suspicion at first, then with real curiosity. He started asking why. Why change water every day? Why trim hooves monthly? Why fresh bedding weekly? Daniel explained the same way he explained everything. Simply, without arrogance. Clean water means healthy kidneys. Trimmed hooves mean healthy legs. Fresh bedding means healthy lungs. Neil listened and nodded. On the third day, the goats produced twice as much milk. Neil's wife came to Daniel with a bowl of porridge. Her eyes were red. She said thank you, quietly, simply, because for 2 months she hadn't had enough to eat and had been afraid her baby would be born weak. And now there was milk, rich, plentiful, every day. A week after that, when Daniel checked the dawn flow, 3 thin new threads extended from Neil's goats, and 1 more from Martha's second goat, whom he'd spent a week approaching patiently, sitting nearby, bread in hand, waiting until she came to him on the 4th day and took it on the 7th. He sat down and summoned the system window. Charges: 24 sheep, 8 goats, 1 donkey. Total: 33. Path of development: condition met, evolution available. He reached for the word in his mind, activate, and the world changed, not on the outside, on the inside. Every thread extending from every animal blazed, not brighter, deeper. He felt each one not as a point of warmth but as a living being with a full interior life. The Count, old and dominant, his thread carrying the weight of earth and stone. Kopka, young and trusting, her thread smelling of milk and fresh grass. Redhead, restless, bold, her thread ringing like water over rocks. Every animal became a separate voice in a chorus he heard with his whole body. And then the voices crescendo and the power surge, not like a morning stream, like a river breaking through a dam. Daniel fell to his knees, his palms pressed into the ground, fingers sinking into the earth like it was soft clay. Muscles tightened under his skin, not swelling outward, compressing inward, like steel cables pulled to their limit. He breathed slowly until the world came back. He stood. He read the window. Class: animal herder. Rank D ability. Call of the herd. Direct animals with voice and will. Radius dependent on strength of connection. Aura of peace. Animals within range experience less stress, improved health, stronger flow. Daniel rated twice. D rank. He had skipped E entirely. Not shepherd, herder, broader, deeper, not just sheep. He looked at the herd, 33 heads. Each one glowed in his awareness, not through his eyes, through something older. He could see their health, their mood, their hunger, their fatigue, like a living dashboard pulsing with every breath. Hannah was standing by the pen watching him. She said, "You've changed." He asked how. She paused. She said he had become quieter inside. The aura of peace, she had felt it radiating from him without knowing what it was. An interesting side effect. That same day, he tested the call of the herd. He stood on the hill. The flock grazed scattered across the slope below. He didn't call out. He reached through the threads, all 33, and sent a single wordless will, to me. 33 heads rose in unison. 33 animals turned and walked toward him, calmly, as one. He stood on the hill for a long time after that and didn't move. The morning after the class evolution, the world was different in every practical sense. The morning flow from 33 animals was 3 times what it had been. The aura of peace worked constantly. He felt it as a warm vibration in his chest. The sheep that used to tense during shearing now stood still. Martha's goat stopped fighting at the trough. Bryn's donkey left the corner and walked out into the herd and stood beside the Count and grazed. But Daniel wasn't thinking about strength. He was thinking about the 5 men who had come at night. 1 stone warning was not going to be enough forever. 10 bandits aren't 5. And if it isn't bandits, but an aristocrat with a squad of knights, stones won't do anything at all. He needed someone who knew how to fight. He was a shepherd, not a warrior. He could lift a bull, and he had no idea how to dodge a sword. On the 50th day, there was a commotion at the village well, shouting. Hannah came back pale. She said there was a woman by the well, a stranger, beaten. Daniel went. A crowd had gathered in a semicircle. A woman lay on the ground, tall, red-haired, blood on her face, shirt torn, a burn scar on her shoulder, scrapes on her hands. 1 leg was twisted at the wrong angle, dislocated or fractured, but she was conscious, and her green eyes were open and furious. The priest stood in front with folded hands. He said strangers had no place here. She should go back where she came from. The woman tried to stand. Her leg didn't hold. She fell back, teeth clenched, and didn't make a sound. Daniel pushed through the crowd and crouched beside her. He looked at the ankle. Swollen, dark blue, dislocated, not broken, lucky. He met her eyes. He asked if she could walk with help. She assessed him. Skinny, barefoot, dirty shirt, his eyes calm. She nodded. He offered his shoulder. She grabbed hold and he lifted her, easily, under a weight that should have staggered him. She felt it. She looked at him differently. He led her to the pen. Hannah brought water and cloth. Daniel washed the scrapes, examined the ankle, told her it needed to be set and it would hurt. She clenched her teeth. He moved in one quick, precise motion. She flinched, exhaled, eyes wet, but she didn't scream. He wrapped the joint tight and reached for the sheep fat he kept in the sack, rubbing it into the burn scar on her shoulder. Old skin, still tight, still dry. The woman watched him work and said, "You treat people like animals." Daniel looked up and smiled. He said the principle was the same. Clean wound, immobilization, rest, food, time. She made a sound that was close to a laugh. The first sign of something that wasn't pain or fury. Hannah brought milk and bread. The woman ate the way Hannah had eaten on her first day, fast, without looking up, afraid it would disappear. When she finished, Daniel asked her name. She said, "Saudi Mako." Her story came out in short, stiff sentences, like a report she'd rather not file. Order of the Silver Spear, novice, C-rank paladin. 6 months ago, a mission on the northern border, a clash with a twisted creature. The commander had ordered her to execute a captured scout. She refused. The commander struck her. She struck back. The squad left her on the battlefield with a magical burn, no weapon, no food. 6 months walking south alone. She had twisted her ankle 2 days ago on a mountain trail and crawled the last miles to the first shelter she could see, which was this well. Daniel listened to all of it and was quiet. Then he asked her one thing. Could she count? Saudi blinked. She said yes. He said he needed someone to count the lambs in the mornings. There were 23 of them, small and scattered and fast. Hannah couldn't keep up alone. Saudi looked at him for a long time. A C-rank paladin who had fought the undead and broken the bones of things that shouldn't exist. Being asked to count lambs. She opened her mouth, closed it. Then she said, "Okay." Daniel nodded, stood up, went to milk the ewe. Kopka patted over and lay down next to Saudi. Saudi looked at the lamb. She reached out her hand. Kopka nudged her palm with her nose. Saudi stroked her, slowly, carefully. Big rough hands accustomed to a spear moving gently across silver wool. Hannah watched from the trough. She didn't trust new people, but Kopka trusted her, and Hannah trusted Kopka. Saudi was treated for 3 weeks. Her leg healed, the scrapes closed, the burn softened. For the first few days she kept trying to help, carry heavy things, chop wood. Each time Daniel calmly took the axe or bucket from her and handed her a mug of milk instead. Saudi was furious. She said she wasn't useless. He said her leg healed faster without strain. She drank the milk, she combed wool. She was angry. In the second week, she started her morning duty. 23 lambs. She stood by the pen on one leg leaning on a stick and counted them, then counted again, then a third time. She came to Daniel, she said, 23. All accounted for. One is limping. Left hind leg. He checked, not a lamb, a yonyu, a pebble between the toes, exactly like Kopka on day 1. He pulled it out, the ewe ran off. Saudi watched. Her eyes were attentive. By the 3rd week she walked without the stick. She chopped wood, carried water, repaired the fence, working hard and wordlessly, the way someone pays off a debt with their hands. Daniel didn't interfere. Work was her language. Let her speak it. One evening she sat by the fire sharpening a knife. Daniel was knotting a rope fence. Hannah slept in the straw with Kopka. Saudi stopped and looked at him. She asked why he wasn't afraid. He asked, "Of what?" She said, "Everything. Bandits, the priest, the village, the world that decided he was trash." Daniel thought for a moment. He said he was afraid every day. Afraid a lamb would die in the night. Afraid a ewe wouldn't lamb. Afraid the spring would run dry. But he wasn't afraid of people. 2 months after waking up, the flock stood at 35. 2 new ewes bought at the county fair. Daniel and Horlick went together in the old man's wagon. Daniel took his time. He examined every animal for sale. Teeth, hooves, wool, eyes, temperament. Out of 40 sheep for sale, he took 2. The seller was offended. Daniel didn't explain. Both new ewes went into quarantine. Both were healthy. Both had bonded within days, not weeks, because the aura of peace worked faster than time. The morning flow from 35 animals was steady and deep, like a motor running quietly in his chest all day. He couldn't measure his strength in numbers anymore. He just knew it was growing, every day, the way the herd grew. On the 65th day, a small woman in dusty clothes arrived in the village carrying 2 enormous dags and a dozen pouches of dried herbs on her belt. Round crystal glasses, hair pulled tight. A face that had learned not to expect welcome. Herbalist Charon Park, come all the way from Chongyang province after 3 weeks on the road, selling tinctures village to village. She spread her wares on a rag by the well. People bought little and said less. Herbalist, grandma's potions, nobody believed. Daniel came down from the hill not because he was sick. He came because he saw the bags, and in the bags he saw herbs. He asked about every single item on her cloth, every vial, every dry stem, every small pouch of powder. Charon answered, first briefly, then in detail, then with widening eyes, because nobody had ever asked her about every herb. Nobody had ever listened like this. He asked if any of her plants were high in zinc or selenium. She didn't know those words. He asked another way, was there anything that made an animal's coat grow faster and thicker? She reached into her bag and pulled out a bundle of dried grass, of bluish leaves. She said, in her province they added it to horse feed before winter. Thicker coats, less shedding. Daniel took the bundle and sniffed it. Rubbed the leaf between his fingers, tasted the bitterness. He had seen this grass in the pasture, the nameless blue grass he had catalogued on his first day. His sheep had been eating it all along. That's why their undercoat was what it was. The grass was the reason. He looked at Charon. She was watching him through her round glasses, round eye, like an owl that had spotted something interesting in the dark. He asked if she wanted to see his flock. She folded up her cloth in 3 seconds. They climbed the hill. Charon stopped when she saw the herd. 35 on the green slope, clean water, orderly pen, silver wool bright in the afternoon light. She stood and looked for a long time. Then she looked at Daniel. She said it was the best herd she had seen in 3 years of traveling. Daniel thanked her. Then he laid 3 bundles of herbs from the pasture on the ground in front of her and asked what she knew about each one. Charon sat down in the grass and took out a notebook, paper and ink, a rarity here. She began to write. They talked until the sun went down. Daniel shared what he knew from another life without explaining where it came from. That this herb reduced fever in lambs when brewed into milk. That this one helped with hoof rot as a poultice. That this one was mildly toxic in large amounts but stimulated appetite in small ones. Charon's pen moved fast. Her eyes blazed. She was not a village herbalist. She was a real specialist in a world that had decided not to need her. That evening, Daniel offered her tea brewed from her own herbs, and when she finished it he asked if she wanted to stay. Not just a few days, for good. He needed someone who understood local plants the way she did. She needed someone who understood what needed to be treated. Together they filled in what the other lacked. Charon looked at her cooling tea and said that in 3 years of wandering, people had called her a witch doctor, a charlatan, a useless herbalist. Not once had anyone called her a doctor. Daniel said they would now. She adjusted her glasses, opened her notebook to a blank page, and said she needed a place to set up a laboratory. He pointed to the empty shed behind the corral. She looked at it and nodded. By the next morning, it was hers. Dags organized, herbs hanging on ropes. Mortar and pestle on the table, notebook open. Dr. Park had begun her work. The next 2 weeks she was in the pasture from dawn to dusk, documenting every plant. Daniel walked with her and showed her what the sheep ate, avoided, craved. By the end, she had a catalogue of 32 local plants with drawings, descriptions, and properties. Then she made what he had asked for. An ointment for hoof rot from local herbs, a decoction for lamb immunity, a feed supplement from bluegrass to strengthen the wool. The ointment was ready on the 4th day. Green, thick, sharp-smelling. He applied it to a ewe whose hoof was beginning to inflame it. 2 days later, the inflammation was gone. Charon circled the recipe in her notebook. The look on her face was something Daniel recognized. Quiet pride. A small victory that was enormous. For the first time, her herbs had solved a real problem and she had watched it work. By the 3rd month, the hollow was producing wool, milk, Charon's ointments. Money was flowing in. Master Alden took every ounce of wool at 2 gold pieces per pound, consistent, no haggling, on the understanding that this arrangement would last. The milk went to the village for free. Daniel didn't charge a single neighbor. Horlick, Neil, Martha, Bryn. They all came with jugs, and Hannah poured without keeping account. At first they were shy, then they grew accustomed. Then they began to bring something back, bread, eggs, turnips, honey. Barter, quiet and honest. Daniel accepted everything and refused nothing and never asked. People saw that, and the hollow began to change. Not on the outside, on the inside. From a collection of separate yards into something that needed a name, but didn't have one yet. Daniel had become the center of it, not by declaring himself anything, just by being there, like a spring on a hillside, present, consistent, useful. On the 90th day, a carriage appeared on the trail below the hill. Well-groomed horses. A driver in livery. A girl stepped out, young, fair hair, a traveling dress of fine fabric. A maid behind her with a trunk. She looked at the village and pursed her lips. Then she looked at the hill and came up. Emma Sutherland, daughter of Baron Sutherland. Class B seamstress. She had heard about the wool, specifically, from Master Alden, who had sold a batch to the capital and caused a tailoring sensation. She was the best seamstress in the province, perhaps the kingdom. She needed material, real material, and she had come to find it. Daniel placed a fleece in her hands without a word. The best one. The silvery undercoat that full length. Emma went silent. Her slender fingers moved over the fiber slowly, the way a blind person reads a face. She opened her eyes. They were wet. Daniel waited. She said she had never, not once in her life, held anything like this. He said it was a standard shearing, not the best. The best would come in 3 months after the Charon protocol had run its course. Emma looked at him as if she couldn't decide whether he was crazy or a genius. Then she asked for all of it, every batch he produced, any amount, on a percentage of what she sold. He asked why she really wanted it. She dismissed her maid with a gesture and stood in the wine on the hillside and told him the truth. Her father wanted to sell her in marriage to a 50-year-old merchant to pay off a family debt. She had refused. He said her talent was a disgrace for a baron's daughter. She had packed at night and left. A familiar story, different words, different scale. The world had said she was useless. The world was wrong. He handed her the fleece and said the first batch was free, show him what she could do. Then they would talk about terms. Emma pressed the fleece to her chest and nodded. She looked at the pen, at Hannah by the trough, at Saudi with her walking stick, at Charon's barn, and bent down and stroked Coca. Her hands were shaking, not from cold. She stayed. She sold her carriage. She moved into a room at Martha's house. She laid her tools out on the table, needles, thread, scissors, thimbles, tatterns, all professional, all well-loved. On the 5th day she brought him a scarf. She had spun the silver wool herself on a small wheel from her trunk, woven it, knitted it in 5 evenings. Daniel held it. It was weightless, soft as the underside of a cloud, and it caught the light the way moonstones catch light, a gentle, silver glow from every thread. Hannah came close and touched it. Her eyes went wide. Saudi whistled. Charon adjusted her glasses and said it could fetch a fortune. Emma stood and waited and twisted the hem of her dress and blushed. Daniel looked up and said it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen in his life. Emma went red. She lifted her chin and smiled, a real smile, white and unguarded, the first since she had arrived. Daniel turned to Hannah. He draped the scarf around her neck and wrapped it carefully, the silver glow against her skin. Hannah reached up and touched it with trembling fingers. She looked at Daniel, at Emma, at the scarf, and for the first time in all the time Daniel had known her, Hannah began to cry, silently, without sound, tears running down her face that she didn't wipe away because both hands were holding the scarf. Emma looked at her and cried too. Saudi turned away. Daniel saw her wipe her eyes with the back of her hand. Master Alden himself came to the hollow in his creaky wagon in the 5th month. For the first time in 40 years of trading wool without leaving the city, he offered an exclusive contract, all wool through him to the capital, at the same price, 15% commission. He knew what he was doing. He didn't ask for more because greed would have killed the arrangement. Daniel agreed. They shook hands. Alden left with 2 sacks and Emma's silver cloak. A month later, he returned with the money and a letter. The Duchess of Valor had bought the cloak at auction for 120 gold pieces. She wanted 3 more cloaks, 2 dresses, 6 scarves before the winter ball. Emma's hands shook when she read it. Daniel told her not to rush. Quality matters more than speed. She nodded, exhaled, and went to work. By midwinter, Lizzie had arrived, a 15-year-old girl with darting eyes and quick hands, caught trying to steal a wheel of cheese from behind the pen. Daniel had waited behind her, let her take it, then asked if she was hungry. She'd frozen. He'd said she could keep the cheese, but next time she should ask, he had plenty. She'd followed him back to the pen at a careful 3-step distance, like a stray cat deciding whether to trust. He'd broken bread and left half on a rock. A minute later it was gone. She stayed. F-rank thief, nobody's priority, nowhere to go. The hollow had taken her in not by decision, but by gravity. Hannah gave her a blanket without a word. Kopka curled up beside her that first night. Lizzie put her arms around the lan, and was asleep in under a minute. And more people came. A fisherman's son with a bruised face whose father beat him for a fishing class, a beekeeper with 2 children whose hives had been taken by creditors, an old man with one clouded eye who knew every plant within 20 miles. Daniel hadn't called any of them. They came because they heard the same thing. There was a shepherd in the hollow who didn't think you were trash. 120 animals by the end of the first year. 3 generations of lambs, the count's offspring, the princes, and now the 3rd generation. Larger at birth, finer wool, stronger immune systems. 23 people besides the original villagers, all from the lowest classes, all doing what they knew. Fishing, healing, carrying, building, gathering, sowing. All of it needed, none of it wasted. A community taking shape without bylaws or a name, built from the same principle as a healthy herd. The system window had shown a new condition. Keeper of the herds, 100 animals of 5 species, 3 generations of healthy offspring. Voluntary recognition of the human community. The voluntary recognition came in a village meeting at the corral, over 100 people, locals and newcomers, who gathered and said aloud what had already been true for months. The village elder spoke, Daniel the shepherd, guardian of the valley, voice of the community, protector of the herds. Everyone nodded, Horlick first. Then Neil, Martha, Bryn, even the priest. Even Dawn's former fiancée, her baby 6 months old. Healthy and strong because she had drunk milk from Daniel's sheep throughout her pregnancy. And the system activated, and for one endless second 120 threads of silver light stretched from every animal to Daniel and from Daniel outward to every person standing nearby. A living web, warm and pulsing. Every person saw their own thread, their place, their purpose, what they were part of. Then the light went out. The threads vanished. People blinked and looked at each other and didn't understand but felt that something had changed. In the way a rune changes when a window is opened. Class, keeper of the herds, rank B. New abilities, aura of life. All living creatures within range receive enhanced health. Wounds heal faster. Diseases slow. Voice of the earth. Call all bound creatures simultaneously toward a single will. Daniel stood in the center of the gathered community and read the window once and looked north. The wine from the mountains carried a scent that didn't belong to rain or snow, something old, something heavy and sweet with rot. The rift was opening, the 3rd breach had begun. A month later the news arrived by messenger. The northern fortresses had fallen. The army was retreating. The 2nd line was on the river and it wouldn't hold. The village froze. People ran to pack what they could carry, south, away. Anywhere the rift wasn't. Daniel stood on the hill and looked north and thought. Then he went down and gathered his people, Hannah, Saudi, Charon, Emma, Lizzie, me. He said he wouldn't leave. The hollow was his land, his people. He would not drive 120 animals onto roads full of panic and chaos. He would meet the breach here, in his own way. Saudi stood and took her spear. Hannah stood beside him on his right without saying a word. Charon had smoke pouches and healing mixtures. Emma began cutting strips of silver cloth for bandages, the strongest weave, the kind that didn't fray. Me raised her hand and the water in the irrigation ditch rose and froze into a transparent wall. Across the valley mouth, Lizzie climbed the nearest tall tree and said she'd whistle if she saw anything coming. Then Daniel turned to the village and saw them, not running away. Standing. Horlick with a pitchfork, Neil with an axe, the blacksmith with his hammer, the miller, the fisherman, the beekeeper, the apprentice, the porter, the gatherer. All of them, with tools instead of weapons, standing and looking at him. 23 people the altar had called trash, holding what they knew how to hold, ready to use what they knew how to use. The priest stood at the back, pale, without his smug smile, but standing. He didn't run. The village elder nodded to Daniel. Daniel nodded back. He turned north and waited. They came at dawn 3 days later. 20 creatures, distorted, black, moving with a rawness that made the air shimmer and the earth groan. Lizzie's whistle split the morning from the treetop, 20 from the north, fast. Daniel stepped out of the pen. The herd followed, 120 animals, calm and deliberate, 20 dogs on the flanks, donkeys and horses behind, sheep and goats ahead. Hannah on his right, Saudi on his left, spear forward. The village at their backs. Mi's ice wall caught the first creature. It struck, the wall buckled. She twisted the water into a spiral, the energy scattered, and the creature flew back. Saudi met the next 3, 6 months of hunger and humiliation and something burning to defend. She was not the same paladin they had stripped of her spear. The dogs hit the next creature in a wave, untrained but loyal, instinct driving them in and back and in again. A creature broke through the line and came for the pen, for the lambs, and Daniel stepped in front of it, alone. It was twice his size, black fangs, black claws, eyes with nothing behind them but hunger. It lunged and struck with its full weight, claws digging for his chest. They stopped at the skin. He did not move. A year of 120 animals, every dawn, every winter night in the pen. Every lamb pulled into the cold world and wiped clean and set on its feet. All of it lived in his body now. He held his ground and placed his hand on the creature's snout. It froze. He looked into its eyes, black, empty, ravenous. But at the very bottom, beneath everything that had been done to it, something flickered. Not hunger, not rage, fear, the fear of something cornered, something lost, something that had once been part of something larger. Daniel knew that fear. He had seen it in a lamb tangled in wire, in an old donkey no one looked at, in a girl who ate scraps in a barn and came to the well only at night. He activated the voice of the earth, not as a weapon, as a call, the same call he had used on the first morning of the herd, when 33 heads turned and came. Behind him, 120 animals, 100 people, 6 women who had been told they were nothing. A small valley between 3 hills and everything that had grown there in 1 year. He said quietly, "Hush, you two were someone's herd once." The creature shuddered from its spine outward. Its claws retracted, the black in its eyes shifted. It sank to the ground slowly and lay against his leg, like a lamb too tired to stand. Everything stopped, people, animals, wind. The other creatures halted one by one, the way a flock halts when its leader lies down. They lowered their heads, they waited. On the hill to the south, Baron Gustav Reiner had ridden out to watch the shepherd perish under the fangs of the twisted. He dropped his spyglass, his arm hung at his side. His face was the color of chalk. To the north, something shifted near the rift. It did not close, but it fell silent. The way very old things fall silent when they finally see something they recognize. Something had been waiting 1,000 years to see it again. Not a sword, not an army, not a spell. Care, connection, trust. A thread stretched down from the rift to the hollow, thin as memory, old as the first name ever given to a flock, silver. Daniel raised his head and looked north, far beyond the hills, and felt someone looking back, not with threat, with something closer to relief. Hannah took his hand, quietly, simply, the way she took the mug of milk every morning. Natural, unannounced. He looked at her, gray eyes, a still face, no fear in it, no doubt, only light. The same silver light as the wool of his sheep. He said, "Good morning, by the way." Hannah smiled, widely, opally, without guarding anything. The first smile like that she had given the world. Kopka bleated at their feet. The count stood at the edge of the slope, old and solid. Horns twisted 1.5 turns, watching north. His gaze was calm and steady. The gaze of a ram who knows his shepherd is nearby. The sun rose over the 3 hills, a new day. A new dawn, 120 threads worn and present in Daniel's chest. And one more. Thin, ancient, silver, reaching down from whatever had been watching in the north. Finally ready to trust again. The shepherd stood in the hollow where the world had said nothing would ever grow, and the world, as it turned out, had been wrong about that too.